Some buildings are masterful works of art, built with tradition and meaning in mind. But it's the people who enter their threshold that make them special. It's the hard work, trials, and tribulations of these people that make these places epic and historic. It is these same people, drivers, mechanics, and machinists, that make a run-of-the-mill garage the place where historic accomplishments are forged. Take a short drive west of Hallman Memorial Way, just outside the town of Speedway, Indiana, and you'll find one of these places. Tucked away down an unsuspecting driveway is an average-looking garage, but what has taken place inside is far from average.
I would say there's more drivers and mechanics went through this garage than any independent garage in the world.
We had different race drivers that worked here to make their way through. I think anybody that was a famous race driver probably drove one of our cars or drove for Grant. From AJ Foyt, Mario, Al Unser, you had Johnny Rutherford, Billy Englehart, John Martin, Jerry Weeks, Sheldon Kinzer, Billy Vukovich, Larry Dixon, Raleigh Beal. And there's a bunch of them that I'm forgetting, but those were all pretty phenomenal race drivers.
Grant King's auto racing obsession began in his youth, and for Grant, auto mechanics came naturally. Early in his career, he had worked for multiple race teams. During this time, Grant learned that great accomplishments in racing don't just happen, they are earned. So in 1969, Grant and his wife Doris purchased land to build a garage. They wanted a place of their own where they could make great things happen.
The property was owned by Junior Dreyer originally, that owns Dreyer Motorsports. My uncle and aunt, Grant and Doris King, bought the property off of him in 1969. The shop was built in 1970.
The Grant King Race Shop was open and ready for business. During the 70s and early 80s, Grant and his employees would create one of the largest open-wheel car shops at the time.
My uncle was very hardcore, hard worker. He'd work day and night if he could, and pretty much had to pay for the place.
He was a working monster. He was so driven to hard work. He'd work here till late, and sometimes he was a man of few words, and it didn't take him all day to look at a horseshoe. And as I say, he only chewed his tobacco once. He'd tell you once, that was enough. If he had to tell you the second time, I don't think you'd be here.
Grant wasn't the only workhorse in the family. Doris King was the first USAC licensed woman mechanic, and at his side, making great things happen. It was this work ethic that made the Grant King Race Shop a nexus in the open-wheel racing world. Many drivers, owners, and mechanics alike have walked through its garage door.
Anybody that was somebody in racing pretty much had worked here at some point in time.
You just start looking around at the pictures on the wall, and you say, yeah, some drivers went through here, but you start counting them, and it's endless. It's an endless amount of drivers that went through here. And just about anybody, except for the recent years, that ever run at the Speedway over here, has all been through this garage at one time or another, either driving or as a mechanic, crew chief, or whatever. So I was lucky enough to be part of it.
The mechanics and machinists that worked in the Grant King Race Shop were second to none and built their race cars from the ground up.
But when John showed up at the door, there was a pile of metal, and Grant goes, "These are our race cars." Well, yeah, doesn't look like a race car, but 5 months later, there was 3 cars in the Indy 500 with Bob Harkey, Sheldon Kinzer, and John Martin. But we had some wonderful machinists. You had Dave Flick doing the machining, Tom Deal, and you had Jerry Weeks pounding out the metal. Gordon Barrett was involved. You had Grant. And there was just a talented group of guys.
Racing is in Bill, or Billy Throckmorton's blood. And fortunately for him, he grew up with great family and friends to cultivate his natural-born passion for racing.
Well, Billy he was about so tall. I think he was about 9 years old. He and Doris were pretty close, and he was close with Grant. And Grant worked with him on stuff and helped him with his little midget cars and quarter midgets and stuff like that.
Actually, I got my first race car from Grant. Before then, Mike and John Gregg brought me a quarter midget back, and it was kind of, it was a little junkier than what Grant would accept. So Grant sent that one down the road, and I actually think Galen Fox's kids ended up with that one. I ended up with a Curtis 500 quarter midget, and on my 4th birthday, it was given to me by Ralph Ligori and Jim Hurtubise. And there was a lot of pretty well-known people there, from Dale Burton, all the Burton girls, I think Roy Carruthers, Andy Hurtubise, and we were all kids then, but everybody stayed together and grew up in the racing scene.
The Grant King Race Shop was little Billy Throckmorton's favorite place to hang out. Day after day, year after year, he spent time in the garage with the greats of the racing community, and it paid off.
He was quiet, seen and not heard type kid, and he was absorbing a lot. And I guess he paid attention because he seems to be pretty talented on building stuff today.
So I started racing at 4, ran quarter midgets, did it as much as I could. Started running midgets when I was fairly young, but Grant never, he never babied me. I had to build my own midget, and he didn't furnish anything for it. Ran it for a while, then he said, hey, you want to drive my car? And we did that.
Throughout the years, Grant King's obsession with racing never wavered, and it was this obsession that drove him to many successes. King built cars, won championships with the International Motor Contest Association, IMCA, the United States Auto Club, USAC, and countless outlaw circuits, while driven by a virtual who's who of open-wheel racing. Grant also started his own Indy Car team, hiring drivers like Roger McCluskey, George Fulmer, Steve Krisiloff, Greg Weld, Merle Bettenhausen, Bentley Warren, Sheldon Kinzer, Bob Harkey, John Martin, Gary Bettenhausen, Art Pollard, Roger Mears, and Tom Sneva. Grant had great success during the 70s and early 80s with his Indy Car, Sprint, and Champ Dirt Car teams. But the late 80s were tough times for Grant King personally. This culminated with his falling from grace in 1990. Grant was given a 6-month prison sentence for his part in an auto theft ring. The judge said, King's cooperation in the continuing federal investigation is one reason his sentence was below the minimum. After time served, it didn't take long for the hard-working King to bounce back.
Grant got a little vacation in the Pokey, and by that time I was running sprint cars, and I did that for a while, and I quit when my daughter started running.
In 1994, Grant King was inducted into the Victoria Auto Racing Hall of Fame and Museum. And in 1998, he was inducted into the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame. It was not long after that his life came to a sudden and tragic end. In December of 1999, Grant King died from severe injuries he suffered in a car accident. Grant's wife tried to keep the garage operating, but things fell into disarray.
It was sad. The place was just really deteriorated. It was depressing if you walked in and seen it. And his widow had called me up and asked me if I wanted to buy it. And I looked around. Always loved the place. I grew up here from the time it was built, and didn't know if I really wanted to mess with it because it was an awful mess. But my wife and I, we bought it, kept it, and we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in. And we've restored the place, and now it's a working museum.
That blood, sweat, and tears mostly came after the Grant King Race Shop had caught on fire.
We had the fire and had to rebuild, and it's been a love and passion to get it back to Bill's childhood memories and being here and involved in racing. It was unfortunate for Billy. He lost a lot of his beloved stuff. Fortunately, he kept a lot of it. We have other buildings, so when it started coming back, it just grew. The more stuff he pulled out to save, we ended up just started hanging them up, and it just barrel-rolled from there. And it's been a process and a preservation of history.
The place, it caught on fire and burnt to the ground. and he rebuilt this and did a beautiful job of rebuilding it back as it was. This is the same floor, same everything as it was. Same garage, same equipment, same mill, same lathe, same welders, same everything.
We saved a lot of the stuff, the building, when we redid it. We redid as much as we could and took it back to the face of the building, which it was just like it was set up in 1970 when it was built originally.
Well, it was quite a shock. It took me back in time, back to 76. I mean, it was like deja vu, you know, and then I went up to the engine shop. That same bench that I built the engines on, the same little roll around, it's still there. That's what I'm working on today. And it was just like stepping back in time. And that's all the memories come flooding in that I haven't thought about for all these years, like 40 years.
Bill and Stephanie Throckmorton have worked hard to preserve the memory, legacy, and history that has taken place in the Grant King Race Shop. They have decided to honor Grant and all others who have made this race shop so special in a way that Grant would approve. They would keep on working. And so the Throckmortons have created a working race shop museum.
My wife Stephanie and I, we both thoroughly enjoy racing. We're doing a lot of vintage Indy Car stuff, building Offenhauser engines up in the motor room. We can build just about anything from the Chevy racing engines to the Offenhauser engines, which is a rarity. We can fabricate anything in here, for your Eagle Indy Car all the way to your 1960 Sprint car. Or we can do modern stuff. But we're just enjoying it. I call it my working museum. And Stephanie and I both thoroughly enjoy it, and she's a big part of it.
Day to day, Billy still does his advanced welding and engineering, so that's still fabricating as longtime customers that he works on a weekly basis with. He does do restoration of cars and parts. Now we have lots of people coming in, and it's hard not to close the door. Some nights, like last night, we're down here till 8 o'clock, just from people coming in, and stories come out, and you can't miss them. Just the good old days. Billy does his curating. I mean, he walks them around the room, and they'll want to come back. Can I bring back a friend? Can I bring back? So it has grown to the point where we have aspirations to do a little bit more events here to share the stories and share the facility.
When I finished that race, after 500 miles, I felt I could race 2 or 3 more.
Horsepower helps a bunch, and I set the track record in 73 at Indianapolis.
We actually had a wedding in here, my wedding, mine and Stephanie's, and that was kind of neat. Everybody thoroughly enjoyed that. We do special events. We have anything from hors d'oeuvres to upscale food. It's pretty neat in here when they move a few things around, get some tables, and it looks splendid, it really does. On the nights like that where they're doing events, it includes personal guided tours, there's a bar, there's food. Everything is specially coordinated to fit your needs. We have groups that we have come in and we coordinate the numbers of people and the way we handle the group. Another fun feature is our 37-foot stretch limousine. We use it for corporate events, we use it for private outings. Usually we'll pick you up, bring you to our shop, give them a grand tour, take them through the motor shops, the fab shops, and one-on-one with usually one of the old Indy 500 drivers, or you never know who's going to be in the shops that day. And then we will drop you back off. But we can handle 6 to 8 people quite comfortably, and that seems to be the magic number. Inside our limo, as you climb in it, you'll notice it has the moonlight roof. There is a television, a stereo system, DVD player, full wet bar, and has a sunroof also. So it's quite plush inside the back of the limo. But those people were fascinated because they had Johnny Parsons in here, John Martin, Jerry Weeks, and it was neat because they could talk to race drivers one-on-one, which you can't do every day. It's a rarity to be able to walk in, see some fantastic history, and talk to the people that made the history while you're there.
There's no other place like this place with this history that I can imagine anywhere in the world. What I'd like to see is a younger generation, if they could come in and get the knowledge of what really happened, what here, so they know how we got from 70s to 2000s. Because I think there's a lot of people that don't know it, and they, until they know the history, they can't really appreciate it. The more I think back about it, the more people I talk to, the more I realize time in history is pretty important. And I think everybody, if they have a chance at all, should come and see it, to know what really went on and how much what happened here in this particular place. Until you've seen it, you can't believe it.
I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can see in here, and the more you walk around, the more you do see. Almost every item in this shop has a story behind it of some kind from some point in time throughout the years, and there's still stories being made today.
During Grant Keene's life, he produced over 250 complete cars, no kits. Many of these cars are highly valued to this day.